Beginning on May 4th, 2019, Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad launched nearly 700 rockets from Gaza into Israel, which were cheered by the cries of Allah Akbar, or God is greatest.
Allahu Akbar! 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 Allah!
Almost 250 of those missiles were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome air defense system. In response to those attacks, the Israeli Defense Force, or IDF, targeted over 350 rocket launch sites, command centers, weapons facilities, observation posts, military compounds, and individual terrorists. The IDF destroyed a Hamas headquarters building, a Hamas cyber operations building, and killed Hamed Ahmed Kudai, a financier responsible for transferring funds from Iran to Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, allegedly helping to fund the building of rockets. To understand what is happening in the Middle East today, it is necessary to understand the history. Welcome to Operation History. This is the next installment in our series, Losing the Peace. In this episode, I am going to discuss how the treatment of Palestine in the peace following World War I and World War II ultimately led to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the war that the Israelis call the War of Independence, and the Arabs call Nakba, or catastrophe. The Arab-Israeli conflict is rooted in a quest for control over land. Israel is only around 10,000 square miles, which is about the size of Maryland. The conflict also has its religious roots. The Jewish population in Israel believes that its claim to the land stems from the biblical promise to Abraham and his descendants. The Israelis also believe that they deserve the land of Israel as a religious haven from anti-Semitism. Palestinian Arabs lay claim to the land since they have represented a majority of the population for hundreds of years. Also, the Palestinians believe that they have a religious claim to the land because of Abraham's son, Ishmael, who is the forefather of the Arabs. At the beginning of the 20th century, most of the Jews living in Palestine were living in cities of religious significance: Jerusalem, Hebron, Safad, and Tiberias. The attachment of these Jews to their land was religious in nature. The idea of Zionism, which promoted a Jewish state in Palestine, came from secular Jewish immigrants from Europe. By World War I, the Jewish population in Palestine had doubled to 60,000 as a result of recent settlers. In contrast, the Arab population in 1914 was nearly 700,000. In 1915 and in 1916, during World War I, the Ottoman Empire was starting to crumble. European powers had begun to extend their reach into the Mediterranean, including the Middle East. The British commander in Egypt, Sir Henry McMahon, secretly contacted Hussein ibn Ali, the Ottoman governor of Mecca and Medina. McMahon convinced Hussein to lead an Arab revolt. This coincided with the goals of Britain, France, and Germany. The Arab revolt was led by T.E. Lawrence, who became known in film as Lawrence of Arabia, and Hussein's son, Faisal. The revolt was a success in bringing down the Ottoman Empire. At the same time, however, Britain was making other promises. On May 16, 1916, a secret agreement was made by England and France. The secret accord was called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Under that agreement, most of the Arab lands under the rule of the Ottoman Empire were to be divided at the end of World War I into British and French spheres of influence. Adding to the confusion, a third promise was made by Britain. The British Foreign Minister, Arthur Balfour, issued the Balfour Declaration in 1917. The Balfour Declaration lent the support of Britain to the creation of a Jewish national home in Palestine. The declaration fell short of what Zionists had been hoping for, which was a declaration that Palestine would be the Jewish home in Palestine. The document also said that nothing could be done to violate the rights of non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Despite these shortcomings, the Zionists viewed the Balfour Declaration as a positive step forward. After the end of the war, pursuant to the Sykes-Picot Agreement, Britain and France convinced the League of Nations to grant them authority over the former Ottoman territories. These regimes were called mandates. France obtained a mandate over Syria and carved out Lebanon as a separate state with a slight majority for Christians. Britain obtained a mandate over what is now Israel, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and Jordan. In 1921, Britain divided the area in two. The land to the west of the Jordan River became the Palestinian Mandate. That was the first time Palestine became its own political entity. The land to the east was the Emirate of Transjordan, which was ruled by Abdullah, Faisal's brother. The Arabs were upset because the British failed to keep its promise of creating an independent Arab state. The support of Britain of the creation of a Jewish national home further created tensions. As many Jews immigrated to the area and bought land, many Arabs became concerned. In 1920, the Jewish National Fund purchased large tracts of land from absentee Arab landowners and evicted the Arab tenants. Conflict began to break out, particularly at significant religious sites. In August of 1929, Zionists raised a Zionist flag over the Wailing Wall, a site of religious importance to both Jews and Arabs. A week's worth of fighting left 133 Jews and 115 Arabs dead. Tensions grew, however, as Jewish immigration increased after Hitler's rise to power in 1933. Palestinian resistance to British control and Jewish immigration resulted in the Arab Revolt in 1936. Britain suppressed this revolt with the help of Zionist and neighboring Arab governments. The 3-year revolt left at least 5,000 Arabs killed, 15,000 wounded, and 5,600 in British detention. In total, more than 10% of adult Arab males were killed, wounded, or detained by the end of the revolt. To maintain order, Britain issued a white paper limiting further Jewish immigration and land purchases. The Zionists viewed this as a violation of the Balfour Declaration. The white paper also was viewed as a stunning betrayal in light of the extermination that the Jews were facing at the hands of Hitler. The revolt did not help Arabs politically. Many of the Palestinian Arab leaders were exiled as a result of the revolt and led to divisions between those leaders and the Arabs left in Palestine. By the end of World War II, Britain requested that the United Nations determine the future of Palestine. By the end of 1946, 1.2 million Arabs and over 600,000 Jews lived in Palestine. Jews had purchased 6 to 8% of the land in Palestine, which amounted to approximately 20% of arable land. The United Nations decided to partition Palestine into a Jewish state and a Palestinian Arab state. The UN tried to create a majority Jewish state and a majority Arab state. The territory designated as the Jewish state was 56% of the total land area, which was intended to allow for further immigration. Jerusalem and Bethlehem were to be part of an international zone because of the religious significance of those cities to both groups. The plan was adopted by the UN General Assembly as UN Resolution 181 in 1947. The Zionist leadership accepted the resolution. However, the Palestinians rejected it and viewed it as an international betrayal. Fighting broke out on November 30th, 1947, the day after the passage of the United Nations resolution, with an Arab ambush of 2 buses carrying Jews. The Jews, despite having fewer men in their military, had greater success because of their organization. By the spring of 1948, the Jews controlled most of the territory granted to them under the UN resolution. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the creation of the independent state of Israel. On May 15, 1948, the British left Palestine. After Israel declared its independence, the fighting between the Jews and the Palestinian Arabs expanded into a war between the newly formed nation of Israel and a coalition of Arab states. On the evening of May 14th, the Arabs launched an air attack on Tel Aviv. The following day, Arab armies from Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia invaded the former Palestinian Mandate and attacked the newly proclaimed State of Israel. Forces from Transjordan eventually joined the conflict, but only operated in the areas that had been designated as a part of the Arab state under the UN Resolution 181. Some historians have argued that the Arab states had territorial designs on parts of Palestine and did not want to see a Palestinian Arab state emerge. King Abdullah of Jordan is said to have the goal of annexing the West Bank to Jordan. During the violent fighting in the first months of the war, the outcome of the war was in doubt, but the British Foreign Ministry and the United States Central Intelligence Agency believed that the Arabs would prevail in the war. The combination of a 28-day truce that began on June 11th and arms shipments from Czechoslovakia enabled Israel to double its manpower and substantially increase its armaments. The next 10 days of war proved favorable to the Israelis, who won several offensive battles and seized large swaths of land. In the final phase from October 15th, 1948 through March 10th, 1949, Israel continued to push back the Arab armies and to attempt to define permanent defensible borders. The fighting ended on March 10th, with the Israeli forces taking Rashash and consolidating the southern Negev under Israeli control. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War ended through the signing of separate armistice agreements between Israel and the neighboring states of Egypt, Lebanon, Transjordan, and Syria. The Arab nations agreed to the borders known as the Green Line. Palestine was now divided into 3 areas. Israel increased its size from 55% of the British Palestine Mandate to 78%. Egypt controlled the Gaza Strip, and Jordan controlled the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. These armistice lines held up until 1967. As a result of the war, over 700,000 Palestinians became refugees. The Israelis claim that the refugees fled as a result of orders from Palestinian leaders. The Palestinians claim that the Israelis forced the refugees out through threats and violence. The peace after the Arab-Israeli War did not last. Tensions in the Middle East continued into the 1950s. To protect the interests of Arab nations, representatives from Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Transjordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Yemen met in Cairo in 1955 to establish what was known as the Arab League, a regional organization of Arab states. The League was formed to foster economic growth in the region, resolve disputes between its members, and coordinate political aims. The members of this Arab League formed a council, with each state receiving 1 vote. By October 29, 1956, Israeli armed forces pushed into Egypt toward the Suez Canal after the Egyptian president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, nationalized the canal at the urging of the French and British. The Israelis soon were joined by French and British forces. The Soviet Union began assisting Egypt by supplying arms. The Soviet Union also threatened nuclear war if the French and Israeli and British forces did not withdraw. The United States, under President Dwight D. Eisenhower, intervened and warned the Soviet Union not to threaten nuclear war. At the same time, the United States threatened economic sanctions against France, Britain, and Israel. The United States was particularly upset with Britain for not keeping the United States in on the loop of this matter. In the end, British, French, and Israeli governments responded to the U.S. threats and withdrew their troops in late 1956 and early 1957. Tensions in the Middle East did not end after the Suez Crisis. Israel's Arab neighbors did not recognize Israel's right to exist. The lack of a peace treaty ending the 1948 Arab-Israeli War created a new status quo, which, in the words of historian Michael Oren, was one of the inherent instability, a situation so combustible that the slightest spark could ignite it. That made the important question not if, but when war would break out again.
כשהעם נקרא לתורן, אז הרב רבינו גורן על ראשו חבש את כובע הפלדה, עם שופר ועם כפותה הוא מיהר אל הדקותה, ולחם גם בסיני גם ביהודה. עם שופר ועם כפותה הוא מיהר אל הדקותה, ולחם גם בסיני גם ביהודה. וישנם אומרים שצהל לא המשיך לרבוש אף שעל, כי הרב פשוט נפל מן הכוחות.